Hey guys, we should be live now. So hopefully y'all are on. You can give me like someone could say, yeah, hey, it's working great. It's live. We're good. Basically, what I want to do is first of all, I know a bunch of students from my class are here, and there could definitely be other people because I make these public just for everyone. So I'm gonna start doing some of these live sessions like this, like kind of like a live learning session, I guess I would call it. I'm going to start trying to do these for some of my classes as I go through certain topics. And I know other people are interested in these topics too. So these are just things that I want to hit on, things I want to talk about. For those of you in my classes watching these are just going to be additional type videos to things that you're already getting in class. I'm just giving extra information. These aren't required for you to watch or anything like that whatsoever. So today I want to talk about a couple different things. So first of all, let me talk about like my plans for these videos over the next few weeks. So today I want to talk a little bit about interface design, a little bit about color theory, and I want to show just some of the things that I've developed over the years. I want to talk on Thursday. I'm going to do another one of these sessions, I think also 2 p.m. And what I'm going to do is Thursday's session will be on different kinds of cameras. Like I want to review, well, I don't want to pull any of my cameras. I'm like, they're all in places right now. But I want to talk about SLRs. I want to talk about webcams, webcam quality for photography or for video. I just want to talk about some different types of cameras, how they can be used, because I test these all the time. I probably have like 10 different cameras in my office right now that I'm using, that I've used over the last week, just testing them. I can talk a little bit about like mics too, like this Rode mic that I have right here that's absolutely awful. That I can tell you that about that on Thursday as well. Then next week, I want to get into some Photoshop, and I'll probably spend like a week or two on Photoshop. Just I'm gonna probably like play around with some images, show you guys how to do different things in Photoshop. It's one of my favorite programs to use. And then I want to get into Illustrator a little bit. And for those of you in my class, that's the stuff we're covering in my course. So beyond that, I'm not sure what topics will come next, but I kind of like this idea of like a weekly thing. I've been doing the weekly interviews a lot lately, and I'm continuing that. So July, I don't want to give a date actually, but in after the 4th next week, I'm interviewing Carl Kopp, the gamification guy. So he's going to be my next interview. If you didn't watch my last one, it was with the CEO of Proficient Learning. It's definitely worthwhile because she's really giving her story about like how she became a CEO of a training company, which is really cool to watch. So I think those are some good topics. And basically the interview series, if you guys have any ideas or you want to be interviewed personally, like I would consider that, just let me know. I'm really just trying to get people's story and find out like different people are doing like different fascinating things. And I'm just interested in that in general and trying to find out. I'm going to interview my wife tomorrow about being a mom during coronavirus with little kids and how she's had to deal with like the virtual school from a parent's perspective, which I think will be interesting. And I've got someone who does events for the NCAA and professional boxing and stuff. He does video, and he's going to talk to me about like video stuff, how to get into the field and how that's been affected by what's going on. All right. I just said a lot in like 4 minutes. So, for those of you that are on right now too, if you've been watching any of my live videos or interviews lately, you'll notice that my office is a little different. You can see that I've completely changed it around. I have like this weird office. It's in the upstairs of my house, which is a frog room, I guess that's what it's called. And it's like shaped like half of a stop sign. So it's very oddly shaped for like things like this. So you can see I've got like multiple monitors, monitor 1. This is my monitor. I have another monitor that you guys can't even see. I have a 3 monitor setup right now. All right, so said all that. First thing I want to talk about today is interface design. It's something that we're reviewing in my course right now. And it's something that's extremely important for anyone in e-learning, instructional design, any kind of graphic artist, anyone in marketing, anyone in web development, anyone in computer program. I mean, the list goes on. It's really important to a significant amount of people. So, we deal with developing interfaces, and we're in an a unique time right now in the 2020 versus, and I don't mean because of coronavirus. I mean a unique time because 20 years ago when I started developing web pages, first of all, there was no such thing as a mobile web page. And actually, I started developing web pages about 26 years ago. There was no images on the web. So, things have slowly progressed throughout the years from like, in the early 2000s, it was like people had like these goofy animated GIFs. Every website had like 50 of them on it, where like it was like there one was like a dancing baby was a really popular one for a while. There was like all kinds of stuff, and I do remember having like several on my website, like a GIF that would say like hello, like over and over again. I mean, different kinds of things that we had in our interfaces. And then in the around like 2010, maybe a little before that, 2008, the key to interface design became clean, powerful, sends a message communication is what we started to focus on in our interfaces. And it became more based on theory rather than what excited us. We saw, for those of you that were around during the MySpace era, interface design was basically thrown out the window at that time. You would open up a MySpace page and there'd be like music blasting, and like it would just be really bad because they could design it however they wanted to. While it was neat to see how people would customize their own thing if they could do it, it was an experiment that really showed us that there is a need for good interface design. So we've gotten to this time from MySpace basically, to nice, clean interfaces. But what does a clean interface mean, and how do we develop that? So one of the things people ask me when we start talking about this clean interface and good design is, where should I place my buttons? What colors should I use? Should my buttons be a link? Should I have a header? Where should my content go? What font should I use? And we start talking about all these different, very specific keys that make a nice interface. And while I want to sit there and say, well, your buttons should always be on the top, or your buttons should always be on the left, or you should always have a header image and it should always be on top, and these are the colors you should use, and these are the fonts you should use. Well, I would love to have an answer for those questions that applied to every situation. Unfortunately, that's not the case. When you're choosing all of this stuff, you're selecting an interface based off of your hardware limitations, your software limitations, your audience, and who your client is. You've got to take all of that into consideration to develop your interface. When I say like software considerations, are you using a software program to develop a website or a piece of e-learning or a piece of training? So like if you're using Articulate or Captivate, the general consensus I'm not going to open either of those up right now, but the general way that we develop with both of those is to have a left-hand menu where that's optional, and then have buttons at the bottom of the screen, have some kind of skin that allows us to control. Very similar to like a YouTube skin, the buttons on the bottom of the screen, that the way YouTube has set it up. So when we're developing a piece of e-learning, sometimes we're limited by the software. So when we talk about an interface, it's not always well, this is how I want it, so this is how it's going to be. It doesn't always work that way. A lot of times these are the software limitations. So here are my options based on this piece of software that I'm going to use. Now, the one place where your interface has unlimited options, and it's a place that I love, is the World Wide Web, which is why I have my website open in the back here. Well, no, actually you see my stuff. I usually have a green screen, so sorry about that. It's not in the back of me. It's like to the side right here. It's not behind me today, which is why I have my website open. And I don't want to give this as a good example of interface design because I don't know if my website's all that great. I look at it sometimes when I hate it. So, but I love the World Wide Web because the options for developing an interface are endless. There are so many different things that I can do versus developing a piece of e-learning using Captivate. Captivate does not have the customizability that the World Wide Web does, which is why when I'm teaching someone about interface design, or I want someone to play around with developing interfaces, I love that they can use the web to really explore various different kinds of interfaces. And we've all been on websites that are developed horribly, just terrible. We go to, as I mentioned, the MySpace thing in the mid 2000, like the 2005, 6, 7, that kind of thing, that were developed terribly. And then we've all seen great websites. Whenever I look at e-learning, I feel like 99% of it looks exactly the same. I actually did a video like why e-learning sucks, and it's about like how all e-learning just looks so similar and there's nothing that makes it different, and it drives me nuts, and I get bored out of my mind because of the way we develop it most of the time. I love seeing exciting, innovative training, which I also like seeing the same thing for websites. So let's get into interface design a little bit. So one of the things we have to consider when we're talking about interface design, as I said, like the colors and all that kind of stuff, but I like to consider what is the goal, and where are people viewing this? So about 10 years ago, when I would have conversations with people, they would say, I want this to run on all devices. And unfortunately, it was very difficult to create at that time, it was very difficult to create a piece of e-learning or a website that was going to run on your computer, on your iPad, on your iPhone, on your Kindle Fire. It was not going to run on everything. It was like very, very difficult at the time to create a website or to create a piece of e-learning that was going to run on everything. And the only way to do it was through some kind of programming, and usually some combination of HTML5 languages, which was HTML, JavaScript, and CSS3. So that was how we did it. Fortunately, we're at a place where if I'm developing a website, I can go to Wix and I can pretty much, or WordPress. Actually, I like WordPress the best. Blogger, any different Weebly. There's a million different sites out there. Squarespace, that will let me play with various different interfaces and basically develop the interface for me. Or I can go, if I'm developing a piece of training, I can go into a program like Articulate, Captivate, and Adobe and Articulate are both developing their own like quick web editors. Like Articulate now has Rise and some things like that. Adobe now has Adobe Spark for like infographics and stuff, but they're allowing us to create interfaces really quickly that work on everything with just one publish, which is awesome. So we're at a point, so I say we're at a unique point, as I get back to what I was talking about earlier, we're at a unique point where we can now develop interfaces easily with clicks of a button that work on everything, that are nice and clean. And we don't have to do a lot of work to have that happen. I don't need to be a programmer to create a great interface anymore. My suggestion is that one of the keys to developing a good interface is to understand graphic design and understand what good design looks like. So let's get in to start talking about some of that kind of stuff. So I look at my website. I have my website here in the background, and there are some things that I like, and we talk about good design and bad design. So first of all, when you guys are looking at my website right now and I'm looking at it on a 24-inch monitor, which totally is not where my website is designed to be viewed. And who here, who is it's even watching this, their standard monitors like going to be 30 inches or bigger? Not many people. Most people, they're looking at like a laptop like I have right here. This is a 17-inch laptop, which is pretty big. Most people have a 13 to 15-inch laptop and maybe like a 17 to 19-inch monitor at home. So that's what my site's really designed to, and it's also designed to work on a mobile device. So whenever I'm developing an interface like a website or something like that, always take it into, there's all these different, so this is just a whatismyscreenresolution.net. There's like a million of these sites in Google. And I take my website and I say, okay, well, here's what my website looks like on a 24-inch monitor because I'm looking at it right now. But this isn't exactly what you're going to view it as. So I need to say, well, what does it look like on a 13-inch notebook? And I can click desktop and click 13-inch notebook and see what it's going to look like to you. I can click 24-inch desktop, which I've already viewed. I can see what it's going to look like on a mobile device. I can see what it's going to look like on a tablet, my Kindle Fire 7. So there are all kinds of websites out there that allow us to test, which is really cool. So hold on a second. Let me pull up my chat here. I just closed it. So as I begin to think about developing a website, I think, wow, there's, we're just in this time where there's all this cool technology to actually develop it and make it look good. So let me talk about what happens. So now I've decided that I know we're at this great time where we can develop these easier interfaces. I know there's a million different ways to develop it. I know there's a million different pieces of software. And we get to this point where we start asking our clients and we start asking ourselves, what is the purpose? Where am I going to put my buttons? Where am I going to have some kind of image or logo? What content am I going to have on this? What is the layout going to be? And I start to think about, how do I design? So let me pull something up here. I'm just Google searching really quick. Hopefully this comes up in 1 second. Here we go. All right, so what I've pulled up here is I've pulled up a website that's basically looking at various grid layouts for a website or a piece of e-learning. So when I start designing, when I start developing, so the first thing that I do when a client says to me, I want you to develop a piece of training for me, or someone says, I want you to develop a website, or someone says they want me to develop a piece of software, one of the first things I do during that initial analysis meeting, so I talk about this in my book, during my initial meeting with a client, the first 30 minutes I'm in a meeting with them, we're talking about developing some piece of training, I will pull out a piece of paper, even if it's a piece of paper or doing it online, and I will draw very quickly a grid. And what do I mean by a grid? Well, here's an example. This tic-tac-toe board is one example grid, which we call the rule of thirds. I will draw a grid, almost like a graph paper, on a plain sheet of paper, and I will draw my website based on that. You can see some examples here, how we have these lines on this page. And basically what I'm doing is I know that when I'm developing a page, it is filled with grids. And I know those grids are that's what I have to work with. With whatever software I'm working with, I know they're all based on some kind of rules and regulations. Those rules are based on a grid system. All software, when you're developing, is based on a grid. So look at this website right here, New York Times. We have a square, a square, a square, a big square, a big row. This is one row. This is another row. This is one big row with lots of columns and rows within it. So it's what's called in web design a table. But it's basically one, if I were to take away all these pictures and just outline everything, it would be one funky tic-tac-toe board. It wouldn't be a tic-tac-toe board. It would just be look like a bunch of squares. Let me find another even example here. If I can find some good images of a grid website. Here we go. Here's another picture right here. We can see we have a header. We have content. And you can see the squares. Navigation, footer. I start paper prototyping what their e-learning could look like, what their website could look like on a piece of paper. I start sketching it out. Now you're probably saying to yourself, isn't this what we do during, if you're familiar with ADDIE, or if you're new, you're not familiar with it. So in instructional design, this is what we usually do during the design phase when we start thinking about how we're going to design our content. But I like to do that pretty much right away with a client to show them what this could look like. I can sketch really quick within 5 minutes, and I can say, based on what you're telling me, we're going to put a header here, we're going to put a column here, we're going to put content here, we're going to put buttons here. I sketch that out in what's called a paper prototype. But how do I know where to put these buttons and what colors I want to use and where I should be putting content? So I want to say that a lot of it is experience, and a lot of it is me just playing around with designs that I like and dislike. There is some research out there that has looked at where do people click the most, what colors do people prefer, what fonts do people prefer. And if you do a quick Google search, you're going to see a million different sites with a million different recommendations about all that stuff. The trick is to figure out because what works for site 1 might not work for site 2. So let me pull up, as I have my website here on the screen, and talk about why I chose to design things a certain way. So one of the things that, for those of you in my class, you're going to read about is something called Slaw. So when I'm talking about buttons, when I start thinking about like design of e-learning, website, any piece of software, and I start thinking about like button placement, one of the things that you need to think about are how many layers is this? How difficult is it going to be for a user to get from point A to point B? Do they have to have 5 clicks in between point A and point B? Because if they do, that's a problem. I want 1 click to get to point A to point B. Next question I ask myself, how easy is it going to be for them to find where the buttons are to get from point A to point B? So I ask myself, what's the content of the page? This page, I chose to put all the buttons on top. And some of the buttons have a navigation system. So in order to go to about, there's one, this is the second option. I haven't clicked anything, but it's still the second option. So I had to ask myself, is it worth having about and this drop-down menu where they're not going to see that when they first look at the page? So as I explained, Slaw, there's something called Slaw. Slaw basically says you want your buttons close to one another. So first of all, notice how all my home menu is in one place. It's close to one another. I don't have like my home button here and this about button like right down here, like to the side, and then my blog button like on the right-hand side. All my buttons are close to each other. Then all my buttons are pretty big. Now, if I was designing this, just imagine if they scrolled over this about button and like the cursor, like it wasn't a full big square button. It was just like this little square to the right. Like that wouldn't make any sense. So Law says that your buttons should be big and they should be close to one another. And the reason they should be big, so they should be big enough that a user's not going to click something by mistake. For those of you that just took my MIT 531 assessment course last session, basically one of the things you learn in assessment is that what you don't want to have happen when you're designing an assessment question is that your users are going to accidentally, your top learners are going to accidentally get a question correct or incorrect because you wrote a bad question or you wrote a bad answer. You don't want that to happen. Same thing with e-learning design. You don't want your users to mean to click something and click something else by mistake. So you want nice, big buttons, links separated from one another. Notice how I don't have the home and about button. While they are next to each other, notice how the text is a solid 1.5 inches on my screen away from one another. They're not crammed right next to each other. And when you have to start worrying about button size, mobile device. How many times have you been on a website not designed for the mobile device and you got to scroll in to try to click that button correctly, that link, and you click something else? Happens all the time. I get so frustrated on my phone. I'll be like in a Reddit forum or something like that trying to like click a link and I'm like zooming in to try to like get the right button because it's so difficult to press. Now that happens on the web and there's not much we can always do about that, especially in like forums and certain things like that. But when you're designing a page for a client, you better be darn sure using one of these test sites that when you go to the mobile version, notice I go to the mobile version of my website, the menu's, it's on top, but you actually have to click this big button here. And then these buttons are all huge to get to the rest of my website. So have I followed Law? It's the first thing I ask myself when I'm developing buttons. Am I following Law? And I am. And then look, yes, I do have buttons over here, but this is a whole nother menu. These two menus aren't necessarily related, so it's okay to separate them. This is my social media stuff. I could have put it up here if I wanted to, but it's okay to be here. It's not a bad thing that it's here. So that's how I start to decide about my buttons. So first of all, my design, I've done this paper prototyping. Then when I've done I start to think about, okay, so like my menus, where are my menus going to be? Do I want them to be on the side? Where do we see menus most often? Left, right, top, right? Depending on how someone has designed the page. Most often left or top, depending on what we're really looking at. So we know that good design, for some reason, all these sites are putting their buttons on the left or on the top. So why are they doing that? Are they following bad design by doing it? No. They're following good design practices by doing that. But that doesn't mean that's where our buttons need to be. If we, the thing that I like to tell people, and this goes along with the multimedia principles too, like people are like, well, you know, the modality principle says that using sound and images is better than text and images, so I need to make sure I'm using sound and images. And I say, no, if you have a reason why, if you want to have text and images, then that's what you use. These principles and rules that we have for things, while I like them and I think that they're great guides for people, especially as people are learning, I think that in practice they can sometimes cause a lot of problems because people think that they need to be followed, and they totally do not. Some of the best e-learning things that you will see will not follow those principles, and some of the best websites that you see will not follow certain things that, you know, button placement. It'll almost not look like a website, but it functions so well as one. So you have to start to think about that. So then we talked a little bit about buttons. So we get into color. So I'm a big fan of colors. Like I love colors. When I show you guys some of the stuff that I like painted, my paintings and stuff, all about color. When I paint something, I literally use the whole entire color wheel in my paintings. But I do use this color wheel all the time, and I suggest that you become very familiar with it if you are not. Because when you start thinking about design and how many colors should I use, and what does a complementary color mean? What colors work well and what colors work bad together. So when I look at the color wheel, I love, when I'm first learning about the color wheel, to look at something like, you know, the basic colors, excuse me. Even something like this that shows me like the warm and cold different colors, so I can start to get a feel of just what the color wheel tells me. But I use this in art and painting all the time to match colors up. A lot of people, I think, who aren't graphic artists but are in e-learning, I don't think they ever look at a color wheel ever. I look at this all the time. Whenever I'm going to start a project, I look at the color wheel and I say, what colors do I want this to be? What makes sense? And I look at the color wheel and I say, okay, so there are so many different ways to use the color wheel. Like I could take yellow and greens. I could take two colors next to each other. I could take two colors one away from each other. I could take opposite colors, but I need to pick my colors. And I want to pick colors. I don't want to pick like 30 colors. I want to pick 2 to 4 colors that are going to be the basis for my page. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll go on Google and I'll say color combinations for websites. And I will simply, because it'll just pull up a bunch of different color schemes. Let's see, is this site going to have it? Oh yeah, here we go. It's pulling up, here we go, 5 colors that work well. And I can see an example, because sometimes just looking at the color wheel, while it gives me a good idea of different colors, sometimes I like to see, well, what are they going to look like together? So I want to see how it plays out. And this will give me a great example. If I'm in like PowerPoint or Dreamweaver or really any piece of software now, you can very, very easily look at color combinations just like this website that I just pulled up here. They can very easily, like even if I just pulled up PowerPoint right now, I can look at a bunch of different color combinations. They go from like 3 to 5 colors, and they'll show me all the different color choices that work well together. And they make it very easy to choose a good color combination. But I can't say like dark colors are bad or warm colors are good or something like that, because every time you make a new site or a new product, it's going to be different. Because what are your clients like, first of all? What are their preferences? Who is their audience? What do they prefer? What is the product or thing that this is about? You know, because a piece of training on like kids tying their shoes might be a lot more colorful and different than like training on like, you know, using night vision goggles or something like that. They're very different audiences, two types of colors that you have to look at. Okay, so that's kind of the color idea. And then there are other things we can start to think about, like, well, what are my images going to look like, and how do I develop these images? So one of the things that I really like to stress for my instructional designers, and one of the reasons I'm actually teaching the class that I'm teaching now, which is interface design, is that it is super important for an instructional designer to be able to use Photoshop and Illustrator. So the difference between those two pieces of software are that Photoshop is used for editing graphics. Like this header on my website was done in Photoshop. If you like took a picture with your camera, it would be edited in Photoshop. When I am designing a logo, like a logo for a t-shirt or a logo for a company or a logo for a billboard, I would develop that in Illustrator. The difference between those two pieces of software is that Photoshop uses something called raster graphics, which can be pixelated, which means like, so you know when you zoom in like a photo that you have and it gets really, really blurry and messed up? And this, on the same token, you cannot take like a small picture, a photo, and like put it on a billboard because it will be all pixelated. So we use Photoshop to develop those kind of images. Now in Illustrator, when I develop a logo in Illustrator, it's based on math. These are called vector graphics. So if I were to develop a cool logo in Illustrator, I could send it to a printer to be printed on the side of a building in, you know, 20 feet by 20 feet letters or whatever, because it's based on mathematics. So no matter how big or small you make it, it's going to always look the same. So that's the difference between those two pieces of software. So do I need to develop a logo? If I need to develop a logo for a client, I know I need to use Illustrator. If I'm going to develop graphics for a client, I know I need to use Photoshop. Now, as an instructional designer, I like to say that it's not your job to be a graphic artist. But a lot of instructional designers are doing consulting and they're a one-stop shop. They are doing it all. The client expects them to be able to develop the graphics for them. Now there are a bunch of cool websites online that give you great graphics for your training. Even like you can subscribe to Adobe Captivate, Adobe Stock and stuff like that and pull great graphics that you can use like people and different things like that for your actual training. But a logo, no. You either have to pay someone to develop it or you have to do it yourself. One of my recommendations is that you need to know, and this is everybody, a teacher, everybody, knowing how to use Photoshop and Illustrator will save you so much time, so much effort, make things in your life so much easier for the duration. Just being able to pull a graphic for a presentation that I'm going to be using and edit it quickly in Photoshop with whatever I need to have happen. Like if I need to take something out of it or add something to it or change the size or do whatever I need to do. Having the skill to use Photoshop will just be an amazing skill that allows you to do things like that so easily. So you really have to know how to use. I believe every person should know how to use Photoshop because it's so handy. And it's not that they have to learn Photoshop. They have to learn how to do all that stuff because there's other photo software that's free, but you have to know how to actually do it. And all the photo software is pretty much the same. And I'll talk about some alternatives to Photoshop like GIMP and stuff that are out there and free and open source and stuff. But it's all the same stuff, knowing how to do something, how to like take a person out of an image or cut someone out of an image so that you can have just them without the background. And how do you do that kind of stuff? Okay, so that's kind of some of the basics around interface design that I wanted to talk about. I think the big things here are starting to think about software like a grid. Like my website right here is one big row with a bunch of columns in it. This header is one big row. This web page going across the screen is one big row with multiple columns in it. Starting to look at this like it's a piece of graph paper, because when I paper prototype for my client, I'm thinking about that grid. I'm drawing the grid and showing them where things can be placed on the page, because I know that what the software, whatever software I'm imagining in my head I'm going to develop with, whether that's Captivate or something like Dreamweaver, or I'm programming it or whatever it's going to be, I know those limitations and I can think about how I'm going to lay it out right away immediately. Now that takes practice and it takes a lot of time, and I'm able to think like, oh, I'm using Captivate, here are my limitations. I'm using, you know, whatever, here are my limitations. So you have to know the software up front to be able to do that. But it's a good start, and it's something clients love. And I love paper prototyping because I can draw something in literally 30 seconds. And get approval for a layout for a page. And it also gets them excited that I can do it that quick. All right, are there any questions about that stuff? Does anyone who's watching this have any questions about anything like this? I want to show some of my artwork, some of the stuff I've developed. Maybe I can even pull up some of my e-learning stuff I've developed too. Although I might have to find that. Okay. Why don't I start showing some of the stuff I've developed? And I want to show, I like showing stuff I've developed that is for fun. So let me just pull up here. Let's see. Let me go into no, don't like that. Okay. Let me pull up this. Let me first show you some of the things that I've developed. So I love art, and I love looking at, I feel like when I'm designing an interface, or I'm designing or even doing instructional design in general, that I am creating stuff. I love creating things. So in addition to that, I love taking all those skills and applying them to different pieces that I am drawing or painting or something like that. So I love working with art and seeing how can the things that I am applying at work apply to, how do they apply to art? You know, and I also do this with like, how do they apply to like what an actor does? Like how does, when I'm developing instructional design or telling someone how to like do a presentation, how does that apply to like what an actor does? So you have to be able to take these skills and transition them. So I wanted to show you just some of the different things to show you how I work with like different colors and stuff like that. So for example, you can see I have my art here up on the screen, and it's like I just have like colors pretty much like everywhere. I've got colors all over the place. So let me just go to any painting of mine. So this would be like a painting that was probably like, I don't know, like that big, like 30 by 40 or something like that. But you can see all the colors. Now, when you look at a piece of artwork, do you ask yourself, where is my attention drawn to in this? And then after 10 seconds, what are you looking at? The same thing can be said about a website that you develop for a client or a piece of training. So when you're looking at something like a piece of training or a piece of art, you ask yourself, where am I drawn to? Is that what I meant the audience to be drawn to? So for example, in this picture right away, when I look at it, I'm drawn to the bright colors, right? Because we have bright and dark colors in here. So I'm drawn to the bright colors. I'm drawn to the center of the sun. And then I start to go out to the other stuff and look at all the details and the other things in it. But the first thing I'm drawn to is the center, is that color, that sun. Let's see, what do I want to pull up next? Oh, I've got a bunch of stuff here. All right, let's pull this up. So what is the first thing you see here? What would the first thing be that you see when you look at a piece of work like this? There are two things that I see. I see on the right-hand side, I see the ocean, the white, and then I see the center, the sun. The two bright colors, again, stand out. So when you start to like look at art like this, and I say, wow, so why are these bright colors? They're what I'm seeing. These bright colors that are not cool, they're not dark, are what's popping out. So how does that all of a sudden change your view on what you're going to develop on the web? Maybe what your mobile website is going to develop. What is the first thing you want your users to see? Does this start to tell you, well, maybe I know what colors, how my color combination, I know where I'm going to put the brighter color. So I'm going to put it where I want the users to focus. So you can learn a lot by starting to look at this. These are some just paintings that I've developed. Let me see really quick. Someone asked a question that's actually really good, and this is something I'll get to when I do Illustrator in a few weeks, but let me just answer it. So they noticed that sometimes when they create something, and this isn't just an Illustrator issue, they asked about Illustrator, and basically what they said is, I noticed when working in Illustrator, when I save it as a PDF, the colors change. Why does that happen, or how do you avoid that? So first of all, this is not an Illustrator only thing. Whether I'm working in Illustrator, Photoshop, it doesn't matter. Colors change sometimes when I save it or when I look at it in a different monitor versus when I print it out. So why is that happening? So what happens is there are like 10 reasons why this can happen. And there are a few ways to avoid it. So the first thing I want to tell you is that the monitor that you're looking at, specifically like the monitor quality that you're using, if it's not good, you will look at an image and you might think that there's like pink, if something is pink, and then when you go to print it, it's more purple. And why did that happen? Or why, when I saved it and sent it to someone, does it look more purple? And it could be because your monitor is not good. It could also be that the printer that I'm using is not good. That's another reason that this kind of thing happens. We print something, even though it looked right on our screen, we print it out and the blue is a little lighter or a little more gray. The red is a little purple or a little pink. The green is a little lighter, a little darker. This is a very, very common problem and something that is very challenging to work through. So what are my suggestions to solve this? Because it's something that's going to always come up. So the first thing is that I ask you, can you notice it with the naked eye really easily? Because sometimes there's some color changes and some color shifts and you can't really tell. But when it happens, what do? What I tell people is, where are you putting this image? Are you putting it, so the person asked, is the goal to make this a PDF? If the goal is to make this a PDF and you're noticing that it's the purple, the pink is a little purple on the PDF, you got to go in and change it so it looks correctly on the PDF. And the reason it happens is because the monitors we're looking at aren't perfect. And sometimes you have the wrong settings for your, like, when you buy a new TV, and one of the first things they'll recommend in the book is set your TV up, and a lot of people just go and plug it in. And they don't change any of the settings. And maybe the blue on your TV is turned up too much, or maybe the red is turned up too much. And you get used to it. Your eyes adjust in 1 second to it. So you can't even tell that the blue is turned up too much. And your blues are accented a little more. Or if you have like your blues turned down, you're not going to notice when something is really bright blue because it's going to look more dull. And so you're going to make it really bright so that you see it the way you want it to print out, and all of a sudden it's way, way, way bright. So it's really, a lot of times it's just what your monitor settings are. If it's not looking right in print, maybe it's your printer settings, but you have to kind of play around with your setup and check it out. But that's a very, very common issue. Happens all the time, especially if you take a file from like one computer to the next computer. Oh man, it's like laptops and their settings are way different. It's like just, crazy. What software did I use to develop my paintings? These are paintings. These are paintings. Paintings means paint. Paint. I paint with a brush. I also use these markers right here, which are called Uni Posco. So these are paint markers. I use these for a lot of my details. You can't really buy these in stores, but you can get them on Amazon and stuff like that. I love these markers. They're awesome. They're like probably like $4 a marker or something like that. But yeah, I use all acrylic paints. I really like, what brand is it? Why can't I think of the brand all of a sudden? I really like the Liquitex basic paints, which is kind of funny because they're considered a, so if for any of you who are interested in art whatsoever, and I guess it's good to just know this kind of stuff. There are different kinds of mediums out there when you're doing art. So there's like cheap paint, which is like hobby paint that like you get for like $1 a jar in like Walmart. Then there's student grade paint, which is like a middle grade, and then there's professional grade paint. And the difference, there's a bunch of differences. Usually it's the quality. Like, if you were ever in like art class and you ever painted something and it was real like watery and you had to paint like 80 times to make it like the color you wanted because there was like streaks in the color, you had to like let it dry, paint over. The higher quality paint doesn't have that. But the kind of paint that I prefer is called Liquitex Basics, and it's actually a student grade paint, but I love the texture and quality of it, and it's great because it's like half the price of the professional paint. I can't tell a difference between that and the professional Liquitex or like the professional Golden as far as like my outcomes. So I love it. It's my favorite paint that I use. So I use the Liquitex Basics. You can see I've got my paintings hanging up, like some of them just hanging up on my walls here behind me. And I haven't really done a lot since coronavirus. I want to show some of my e-learning stuff. I just know it's like proprietary and I'm not supposed to. And I don't know if I want that to be public. I do like some, like this is a watercolor that I did. I don't do a lot with watercolor, but like I will do watercolor every once in a while. Like painted that for my mom. I don't know, just goofing around sometimes with stuff. Exploring like this, like just like playing with like colors that aren't supposed to be there. This is like just like painting something realistic. Like this was just me. I just was practicing on a piece of paper, actually just painting realistic waves. Messing around. This was all done in 100% markers. This was me just messing around with markers on a canvas. This is one of my favorite pieces, and I haven't sold this, and I can't believe it because I love this watercolor and drawing so much. And I guess what I like, other people don't. This painting sold. Let's see, this painting sold. A bunch of these have actually sold. This painting sold. I don't know, a bunch of them sold. This sold. This has sold. This I want to sell to like a surf company as like their logo. I think it'd be pretty cool. Actually, this painting looks terrible. It's a much cooler piece of art. Here, let me show you. I'll pull it off the wall because I have it right here because I look at it every day. And I'm always like, this is awesome. I love this painting. I just think it's so cool. It's just like, I don't know, something about this I just like. It just turned out really well. Anyway. And I gotta hang that back up. But no, I don't sell them anywhere. I display them in like, I'll do like a gallery showing and display them somewhere. I was in Tidal Creek for like, for those in Wilmington, I was in Tidal Creek for like a year. But I just got out of there right before coronavirus. So I'm not really anywhere right now. And I've just been kind of away from art since like March when this happened. So I just haven't been doing it as much as I would like to because of that. But anyway, that's about all the stuff I wanted to talk about today. I just wanted to, add some stuff to for my students and just for anyone else, just to get some more information. On Thursday, what I want to talk about is cameras. I want to talk about different settings on your camera, trying to take good pictures. How do you do that? I want to talk about like the difference between point and shoot SLR and like your camera phones and the quality of different phones. I mean cameras for both video and photography. So we'll talk about that, and maybe I'll throw in some stuff about like mics and stuff, some sound stuff as well. And I want to talk a little bit about lighting, a little bit about like backgrounds, green screens, what kind of lights do you use? Oh, you can't see my light right here. I don't know. I'll show you like some of the lights that I use and stuff like that. But that's it, everybody. That's it for today. I don't know how long these are ever going to last. They could last like 15 minutes or like an hour. I just have no idea. It depends once we get started how long it's going to go. But yeah, that's it all. So I hope you enjoyed, and you can always see these like come back to it because it's just on YouTube, so you can see it whenever. If you're subscribed to my channel, or just get my channel from my website here and just go to it and you can always see that stuff. So I just do these, add these to this class. I think for this class, it's like totally appropriate to do this kind of stuff because it's like project based and we're working with our hands, like doing different stuff, especially once I get into Photoshop and stuff. I'll just like play around and do different projects in Photoshop and show you guys because it's fun. I like Photoshop a lot. It's always fun to get into the software. So anyway, thanks all. Have a great day. Have a good week. It's like storming now, but get outside. It's really nice out. We were at the beach this morning for a little bit. Took the boys up to Topsail. Trying to beat the weekend crowds because we're probably not going to go this weekend because there's going to be like a bazillion people there, and we're trying to social distance, and we wouldn't go on the 4th of July anyway. So anyway, later on.